Injured cat rescued by little girl. What happens next will leave you in tears. How do you think this story will unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The rain fell steadily, drumming softly against the leaves and puddling in the cracks of the sidewalk. Sarah held her school bag close, her small boots splashing through the water as she made her way home. She didn't mind the rain. It always seemed to make the world feel quieter, like a secret only she knew. But today, something felt different. There was a sound, faint but distinct, cutting through the steady rhythm of the rain. A cry. Sarah stopped, her heart skipping a beat. She turned her head, trying to locate the source of the sound. It came again, soft and pitiful, like a plea for help. She followed it, her curiosity outweighing the cold seeping through her coat. Near the edge of a park, just beyond a row of hedges, she found the source. A small, trembling figure huddled beneath the branches. It was a cat, its fur matted and dirty, one of its front legs bent at an awkward angle. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had seen stray cats before, darting through alleys or lounging on fences, but this one was different. It looked broken. "Hey there," she said softly, crouching down. The cat's green eyes met hers, wide and fearful. It let out another faint cry, shrinking further into the bush. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, her voice gentle. "I won't hurt you." She hesitated, unsure of what to do. She couldn't just leave it there, not like this. But how was she supposed to help? Her parents didn't even let her keep a goldfish, let alone a stray cat. Still, something in the way the cat looked at her, pleading, vulnerable, made her decision for her. Sarah took off her raincoat and carefully draped it over the cat, creating a makeshift sling. The cat flinched at first but didn't resist as she scooped it up, cradling it against her chest. "I've got you," she murmured, feeling the rapid thrum of its heartbeat through the coat. "Let's get you somewhere safe." When Sarah arrived home, her mother was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She barely looked up as Sarah stepped through the door, dripping water onto the mat. "Sarah, take off your wet boots before you." Her words trailed off as she noticed the bundle in Sarah's arms. "What is that?" Sarah hesitated, clutching the coat tighter. "It's a cat," she said, her voice small. "It's hurt. I couldn't just leave it." Her mother's brow furrowed as she wiped her hands on a towel. "Sarah, you know we can't keep pets. Your father's allergic, and we don't have the time or money to take care of an animal." "I'm not asking to keep it," Sarah said quickly. "But it's hurt, Mom. It needs help. Just for tonight. Please." Before her mother could respond, Sarah's older brother, Ethan, appeared in the doorway. He was 17, tall and lanky, with a perpetual air of boredom. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing at the bundle in Sarah's arms. "It's a cat," Sarah said again. "I found it in the park. It's hurt." Ethan stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. He carefully peeled back the edge of the coat, revealing the cat's injured leg. He let out a low whistle. "That doesn't look good. It might be broken." Sarah's mother sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Fine," she said finally, "but only for tonight. First thing tomorrow, we'll take it to the shelter." Sarah nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you," she said, hurrying to the bathroom to find a towel. She gently dried the cat off, whispering soothing words as it shivered in her hands. Once it was clean, she wrapped it in a soft blanket and set it on a pillow in the corner of her room. Sarah named the cat Milo. Felt right somehow, like the name had been waiting for the cat all along. She spent the rest of the evening sitting beside him, her homework forgotten as she tried to make him comfortable. She placed a small dish of water nearby and offered him a piece of leftover chicken, but Milo barely moved. His eyes flickered open now and then, watching her with a mix of caution and curiosity, but he didn't make a sound. "Don't worry," Sarah whispered, stroking his head lightly. "You're safe now." Ethan poked his head into her room, a first aid kit in his hands. "Figured you could use this," he said, setting it down beside her. "You should clean his wound before it gets infected." Sarah nodded, grateful for his help. Together, They carefully cleaned the scratches on Milo's leg and wrapped it in a small bandage. The cat flinched but didn't fight, his body too weak to resist. By the time they finished, he was fast asleep, his small body rising and falling with each shallow breath. The next morning, Sarah woke early, eager to check on Milo. To her surprise, he was sitting up, his head tilted as he watched her with those piercing green eyes. "Hey, Milo," she said, kneeling beside him. "How are you feeling?" Milo didn't answer, of course, but he let out a soft purr as she stroked his back. It was the first sound he had made since she brought him home, and it filled Sarah with a sense of hope. Maybe he was going to be okay. At breakfast, Sarah pleaded with her parents to let her keep Milo, at least until he was fully healed. "It's not fair to send him to the shelter," she argued. "He's hurt, and they might not have the resources to take care of him." Her father looked skeptical, but her mother finally relented. "Fine," she said, holding up a hand to silence Sarah's cheers. "But only until he's better. After that, we'll find him a good home." Over the next few days, Sarah devoted herself to Milo's care. She spent her pocket money on cat food and borrowed books about animal care from the library. She even asked her science teacher for advice, pretending it was for a school project. Slowly but surely, Milo began to recover. His appetite returned, and he started to move around the room, exploring his new surroundings. One evening, as Sarah sat on the floor doing her homework, Milo limped over and settled beside her, resting his head on her leg. The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes. "You're a brave boy, Milo," she said, scratching behind his ears. "We're going to get you all better, I promise." At school, Sarah couldn't help but talk about Milo. Her friends were fascinated by the story of how she had found him, and some even offered to help. One girl brought an old cat toy for Milo to play with, while another gave Sarah a small bottle of ointment for his wounds. It was heartwarming to see how Milo's story had brought them all together. Even Ethan, who usually kept to himself, seemed invested in Milo's recovery. He would often check on the cat after school, bringing him treats or sitting with Sarah as she read aloud. "He's tougher than he looks," Ethan remarked one evening, watching as Milo batted at a piece of string. "I think he's going to be okay." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself, a mission to help a creature in need. Days turned into weeks, and Milo's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. His once dull and matted coat now gleamed in the sunlight, soft and striped with shades of gray and black. Though his limp remained, his energy returned in bursts of playful curiosity. Sarah often found him perched on the windowsill, his green eyes following the flutter of leaves outside or watching the occasional bird with quiet fascination. Sarah's routine revolved around Milo. Every morning, she checked his bandages, cleaned his wounds, and made sure he had plenty of food and water. She took pictures of him on her old camera and kept a small notebook where she documented his progress. Everything from his first full meal to the day he climbed onto her bed unassisted. "Milo's basically famous now," Sarah joked one afternoon, flipping through the notebook. "Everyone at school asks me about him." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching as Milo pawed at a crumpled piece of paper on the floor. "He's earned it," Ethan said. "Most cats wouldn't have survived what he went through." One evening, as Sarah sat brushing Milo's fur, she noticed something unusual. Just beneath the fur on his neck, there was a faint mark, almost like a tattoo. She parted the fur gently, revealing what appeared to be a series of tiny numbers and letters. "Ethan," she called, her voice laced with urgency. Her brother appeared moments later, his curiosity piqued. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to the mark. "What do you think it means?" Ethan crouched beside her, squinting at the tiny inscription. "It looks like some kind of identification," he said. "Maybe he belonged to someone before you found him." Sarah's heart sank at the thought. As much as she wanted Milo to stay with her forever, the possibility that he had another family, one that might be missing him, couldn't be ignored. "Do you think we should try to find them?" she asked hesitantly. Ethan nodded. "It's the right thing to do. Let's see if we can figure out where he came from." The next day, Sarah and Ethan visited the local veterinarian, bringing Milo along in a small carrier. The vet, a kind woman with salt and pepper hair, examined the mark carefully. "This is definitely an identification code," she said, tapping her glasses thoughtfully. "It's used for therapy or service animals. Let me check the database and see if we can find anything." Sarah's stomach churned as they waited, her hands gripping the edge of the carrier. Milo, sensing her unease, let out a soft meow and rubbed his head against her fingers. After a few minutes, the vet turned back to them, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "I found a match," she said. Milo was part of a therapy program at the Children's Hospital downtown. He went missing nearly a year ago after an accident during an outdoor event. "A therapy program?" Sarah repeated, her brow furrowing. "You mean he helped people?" The vet nodded. "Therapy animals provide comfort and emotional support, especially for children dealing with serious illnesses. Milo was one of the best in the program, according to the records. His disappearance was a big loss for the hospital." Sarah looked down at Milo, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and sadness. "I had no idea," she whispered. "He's so special." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He's still your Milo," he said. "But now we know he was helping people long before you found him." That evening, Sarah sat with her parents, Ethan, and Milo in the living room, the vet's words still echoing in her mind. She explained everything she had learned, her voice trembling as she recounted Milo's past. I think he should go back," Sarah said finally, her eyes glistening with tears. "If he was helping kids, maybe that's where he belongs." Her mother's expression softened, and her father leaned forward, his face thoughtful. "Sarah," he said gently, "what you've done for Milo, saving him, taking care of him, it's already changed his life, but it's okay to want to keep him. He's part of our family now." Sarah shook her head, wiping her eyes. "It's not about me," she said. "Milo helped me when I needed him most. Now it's my turn to help him do what he's meant to do." Ethan gave her a proud smile. "You're braver than most people I know, kiddo." The following weekend, Sarah and her family brought Milo to the Children's Hospital. The staff greeted them warmly, their excitement evident as they led them to the therapy center. Sarah carried Milo in her arms, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and sadness. As they entered the center, the room erupted into cheers. Several children, some in wheelchairs and others wearing hospital gowns, gathered around, their faces lighting up at the sight of Milo. "It's really him," one of the nurses exclaimed, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't believe he's back." Milo seemed to sense the joy in the room. He wriggled out of Sarah's arms and padded over to the children, his tail flicking playfully. One little boy reached out tentatively, and Milo nuzzled his hand, purring loudly. Sarah watched the scene unfold, her heart aching but full at the same time. She knelt down, her eyes level with Milo's. "You're home now," she whispered. "Go make them happy, just like you made me happy." Over the next few weeks, Milo resumed his role as a therapy cat, bringing comfort and joy to the children at the hospital. Sarah visited him often, spending hours by his side as he worked his magic. She read stories to the children, shared Milo's toys, and even helped organize a fundraiser to support the therapy program. Her bond with Milo remained as strong as ever, and though she missed having him at home, she knew she had made the right choice. Milo wasn't just her cat. He was a hero, a source of hope for everyone he met. As Sarah visited the Children's Hospital more frequently, her connection to Milo grew deeper in ways she hadn't expected. The sight of him weaving between wheelchairs, gently brushing against children's legs, and curling up beside them on their beds filled her with a sense of pride she could hardly put into words. Milo wasn't just a pet anymore. He was a lifeline for these kids, a beacon of comfort in a place often shrouded in uncertainty and fear. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in the therapy room, a little girl named Emily reached out to her. Emily, who had been in the hospital for months undergoing treatment, had become one of Milo's favorites. Milo would always hop onto her bed first, purring loudly as she scratched behind his ears. Emily's laughter, light and musical, often echoed through the room when Milo played with her favorite stuffed bear. "Thank you for bringing him back," Emily said, her voice soft but sincere. "I missed him so much. He always makes me feel better." Sarah smiled, sitting on the edge of Emily's bed. "He's a pretty special cat, isn't he?" Emily nodded, hugging her stuffed bear close. "When he's here, I don't feel so scared. It's like he knows how I feel, like he understands." Sarah glanced at Milo, who was now stretched out across Emily's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. "I think he does," Sarah said softly. "He's always known when someone needs him." Later that evening, as Sarah walked home with her parents, she couldn't stop thinking about Emily's words. Milo had an extraordinary ability to bring people together, to provide comfort and hope in ways that no human could. And while it had been hard to let him go, Sarah knew that this was where he belonged. The joy he brought to the children and to her was worth every sacrifice. Still, there were moments when Sarah missed having Milo at home. She missed the way he would curl up at the foot of her bed, his gentle purring lulling her to sleep. She missed their quiet moments together, reading stories and sharing secrets. But every time she thought about bringing him back, she remembered the smiles on the children's faces and the way Milo's presence lit up the room. She reminded herself that this was bigger than her. Milo's purpose was to help, and she was lucky to be a part of his journey. One day, as Sarah prepared for another visit to the hospital, she noticed her brother Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. "What are you looking at?" she asked, sliding into the chair across from him. Ethan glanced up, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Someone posted about Milo online," he said, turning the phone so she could see. "It's a picture of him with one of the kids at the hospital. People are calling him the miracle cat." Sarah leaned in, her eyes scanning the screen. The post had thousands of likes and comments, with people from all over the world sharing their own stories about how animals had changed their lives. Some had even donated to the hospital in Milo's honor, wanting to support the program that had brought so much joy to so many. "Wow," Sarah whispered, her heart swelling with pride. "He's really making a difference, isn't he?" Ethan nodded. "You both are. If it weren't for you, he might never have made it back to the hospital." Sarah thought about that for a moment. It was strange to think how one decision, picking up an injured cat from the side of the road, had led to something so much bigger. But that's how life worked sometimes, she realized. Small acts of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways you could never predict. As the weeks went on, Sarah's visits to the hospital became more than just trips to see Milo. She started volunteering, helping the nurses, and spending time with the children. She read stories, played games, and even organized a small art project where the kids painted pictures of Milo. The paintings were hung in the therapy room, a colorful reminder of the cat who had brought them all together. One afternoon, as Sarah was helping a boy named Lucas paint a picture of Milo, he looked up at her and said, "Do you think Milo knows how much we love him?" Sarah smiled, her chest tightening with emotion. "I think he does," she said. "And I think he loves you just as much." Lucas grinned, his brush streaking blue paint across the canvas. "I hope he stays here forever." The thought of Milo staying at the hospital permanently made Sarah's heart ache. She loved seeing him there, but a part of her still wished he could come home with her. She missed their quiet evenings together, and she worried that he might miss her too. But every time she saw him with the children, she knew she had made the right choice. One evening, as Sarah sat in her room looking through her notebook of Milo's progress, she heard a soft knock at the door. Ethan stepped in, holding something behind his back. "What's that?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan grinned and held out a small photo frame. Inside was a picture of Milo lying on Emily's bed, his green eyes bright and his tail curled around her arm. "I thought you might like this," Ethan said. "You know, to remind you of all the good he's doing." Sarah took the frame, her fingers brushing the glass. "Thanks, Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This means a lot." Ethan shrugged, his expression softening. "You mean a lot to him, you know. Even if he's at the hospital, you're still his person." Sarah hugged the frame to her chest, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I hope he knows that." The next time Sarah visited the hospital, she brought the photo frame with her. She showed it to Emily and the other children, who all agreed that it perfectly captured Milo's spirit. They decided to hang it in the therapy room, right next to the mural of the art project. Milo's wall, Emily called it, her laughter filling the room. It's where we can remember all the times he made us smile. As Sarah hung the frame, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Milo was exactly where he needed to be, and so was she. Together, they had created something beautiful, something that would last long after they were gone. As the weeks passed, Milo became an integral part of the hospital's therapy program. His gentle nature and instinct to comfort made him irreplaceable to the children. Sarah often marveled at how Milo seemed to sense exactly who needed him the most. Whether it was curling up beside a child who had just finished a painful treatment or playfully swatting at a toy to make someone laugh, Milo had a way of brightening even the darkest days. One day, Sarah walked into the therapy room to find a group of children gathered in a circle, their laughter filling the air. In the middle sat Milo, his green eyes wide with curiosity as he batted at a colorful ribbon one of the nurses dangled in front of him. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride as she watched him bring joy to the room. "Sarah," Emily called out, waving her over. "We're teaching Milo a new trick. Come watch." Sarah joined the circle, kneeling beside Emily. "What kind of trick?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Emily grinned. "Watch this." She held out a small treat, and Milo immediately perked up. "Milo, paw," she commanded gently. To Sarah's amazement, Milo lifted his injured paw, placing it delicately in Emily's hand. The children erupted into cheers, clapping and laughing as Emily rewarded him with the treat. "Wow, Milo," Sarah exclaimed, scratching behind his ears. "You're a smart boy, aren't you?" Emily beamed. "He's the best cat ever," she said proudly. "Do you think he'll remember this trick forever?" Sarah smiled, glancing at Milo, who seemed thoroughly pleased with himself. "I think Milo remembers everything," she said softly, "especially the people who love him." One evening, as Sarah sat by Milo's favorite window at home, her thoughts drifted to the children at the hospital. She had grown close to many of them, learning their stories and sharing their laughter and tears. Each one had a unique connection with Milo, and each one had taught Sarah something about resilience and hope. But there was one story that stood out more than the others. It belonged to a boy named Daniel. He was 13, quiet and reserved, with eyes that seemed far older than his years. Daniel had been in the hospital for over a year, battling a rare illness that left him weak and tired most days. Despite his struggles, he rarely complained, and his calm demeanor often made him seem more like an observer than a participant in the therapy sessions. It wasn't until Milo arrived that Daniel began to open up. The first time Milo hopped onto Daniel's bed, the boy's stoic expression softened, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. Over time, Milo became a constant presence in Daniel's life, spending hours curled up beside him as he read or sketched in his notebook. One day, Daniel showed Sarah one of his sketches, a detailed drawing of Milo lying on a windowsill, his tail curled around his paws. "He reminds me of home," Daniel said quietly. "We used to have a cat just like him before I got sick." Sarah nodded, her heart aching for the boy. "Milo has a way of making everything feel a little more normal, doesn't he?" Daniel smiled faintly, his fingers brushing over the drawing. "Yeah, he makes it easier." Milo's impact on Daniel didn't go unnoticed. The nurses often remarked on how the boy seemed more relaxed and even a little stronger since Milo's arrival. Sarah took comfort in knowing that Milo was doing what he did best, bringing comfort to those who needed it most. But one afternoon, Sarah arrived at the hospital to find the atmosphere unusually quiet. The therapy room, usually filled with laughter and chatter, felt heavy with a somber energy. Sarah's heart sank as she spotted Daniel's bed, now empty. "What happened?" she asked one of the nurses, her voice trembling. The nurse placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Daniel's condition worsened last night," she said softly. "He was moved to intensive care. He's stable for now, but it's touch and go." Sarah swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. "Does he know Milo's here?" she asked. The nurse nodded. He asked for Milo this morning. I think it would mean a lot if you brought him to see Daniel. Sarah didn't hesitate. She found Milo lounging in his usual spot, his green eyes lighting up as she approached. "Come on, Milo," she whispered, scooping him into her arms. "Someone needs you." As they entered the ICU, the sight of Daniel lying so still in the bed made Sarah's chest tighten. Machines beeped softly around him, and his pale face seemed even more fragile than before. But when Milo jumped onto the bed and nestled beside him, a faint smile appeared on Daniel's lips. "Milo," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You came." Sarah blinked back tears, watching as Milo pressed his head against Daniel's hand, purring softly. The boy's fingers moved weakly, stroking Milo's fur with a tenderness that made Sarah's heart ache. "You're his favorite," Sarah said quietly, sitting beside the bed. "He always lights up when he sees you." Daniel's smile widened just a fraction. "He's my favorite too," he murmured. "He makes everything better." For the next hour, Sarah stayed by Daniel's side, watching as Milo worked his quiet magic. The boy's breathing seemed easier, his expression more peaceful. It was as if Milo's presence was the one thing anchoring him, giving him strength to face the unknown. The following week, Sarah received the news she had been dreading. Daniel had passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Milo by his side. The hospital staff held a small memorial for him, and Sarah attended, clutching a picture Daniel had drawn of Milo. She placed it on a table surrounded by flowers and candles, her heart heavy with grief, but also filled with gratitude for the time they had shared. As she left the hospital that day, Milo walked beside her, his usual playful energy subdued. Sarah knelt down, wrapping her arms around him. "You were there for him when he needed you most," she whispered. "You gave him peace, and that's something no one else could do." Milo pressed his head against her chest, purring softly, as if to say, "I'll always be here for them. And for you." The story of Daniel and Milo became another chapter in the growing legacy of the therapy cat who had touched so many lives. For Sarah, it was a reminder of why she had made the difficult decision to let Milo stay at the hospital. He was more than just a pet. He was a healer, a companion, and a source of hope in a world that often felt uncertain. As the months turned into years, Sarah continued to visit the hospital, spending time with the children and sharing Milo's story with anyone who would listen. And though she missed having him at home, she knew that Milo was exactly where he needed to be. Because sometimes, the greatest acts of love come not from holding on, but from letting go. Sarah walked into the therapy room the day after Daniel's memorial, clutching the picture he had drawn of Milo. The room was quieter than usual, the weight of Daniel's absence still fresh in the air. The children were subdued, their usual chatter replaced by whispered conversations and distant stares. Even Milo, who usually greeted Sarah with a flick of his tail and a cheerful meow, seemed more reserved. He stayed close to Sarah, brushing against her legs as if sensing her need for comfort. Emily was the first to approach Sarah. The little girl's eyes were red from crying, and she clutched her stuffed bear tightly to her chest. "I miss him," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. Sarah knelt down, pulling Emily into a gentle hug. "I miss him too," she whispered. "But you know what? I think Milo misses him most of all." Emily nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Do you think Milo knows he's gone?" Sarah glanced at Milo, who had curled up in Daniel's favorite spot by the window. "I think he does," she said. "And I think he's sad just like we are. But Milo's really good at turning sadness into something else. Something brighter. That's why he's here, to help us remember the happy times." The other children began to gather around, each sharing their favorite memories of Daniel and Milo. They laughed as they recounted Daniel's excitement when Milo learned the paw trick and smiled as they remembered how Milo would curl up beside Daniel during story time. It was a bittersweet moment, but it reminded everyone of the joy Daniel had brought to their lives, and the joy Milo continued to bring. In the weeks that followed, Milo seemed to take on a new role at the hospital. He became a quiet guardian, offering comfort in moments of grief and hope in moments of uncertainty. The children often said that Milo could sense when someone was having a bad day. He would appear out of nowhere, hopping onto their beds or rubbing against their legs until they smiled. One day, as Sarah watched Milo work his magic, a nurse approached her with a warm smile. "You've done something incredible, the nurse said. "Milo has always been special, but you gave him a second chance to be the hero he was meant to be." Sarah blushed, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I just wanted to help," she said. "Milo did all the rest." The nurse chuckled. "You did more than help. You gave these kids something to believe in. That's not something they'll ever forget." The ripple effects of Milo's story began to spread beyond the hospital walls. News outlets continued to share updates about the miracle cat, and donations poured in to support the therapy program. The hospital used the funds to expand the program, bringing in more therapy animals and creating a dedicated space for them to interact with the children. Sarah was thrilled to see the program grow, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Milo was at the heart of it all. He was the reason so many people cared, the reason the children felt safe and loved. And while she missed having him at home, she knew she had made the right decision. One evening, as Sarah sat at her desk working on a school project, Ethan knocked on her door. "Got a minute?" he asked, leaning against the frame. Sarah looked up, setting her pen down. "What's up?" Ethan held up his phone, showing her an email from a local filmmaker. "They're making a documentary about therapy animals," he said. "And they want to feature Milo and you." Sarah's eyes widened. "Me? Why me?" "Because you're the reason Milo's back at the hospital," Ethan said. "They want to tell your story too. How you found him, how you helped him heal." Sarah hesitated, her thoughts racing. The idea of being on camera made her nervous, but the chance to share Milo's story with even more people was too important to pass up. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll do it." For Milo, the documentary crew arrived at the hospital a few weeks later, their cameras capturing every moment of Milo's daily routine. They filmed him playing with the children, curling up beside them during story time, and even demonstrating his paw trick. Sarah was interviewed about the day she found Milo, her voice trembling as she recounted how one small act of kindness had changed both their lives. "I didn't know what I was getting into when I picked him up," Sarah said, her eyes glistening with tears. "I just knew I couldn't leave him there. And now I can't imagine my life without him." The crew also interviewed the children, their families, and the hospital staff, all of whom had been touched by Milo's presence. The finished documentary, titled A Paw to Hold, the story of Milo, premiered at a local theater, with Sarah and her family in attendance. As the credits rolled, Sarah looked around the room, her heart swelling with pride as she saw the smiles and tears on the audience's faces. Milo had touched so many lives, and now his story would continue to inspire others for years to come. The years passed, but Milo's legacy remained strong. Sarah grew up, graduating from high school and eventually pursuing a career in veterinary medicine. Her experiences with Milo had ignited a passion for helping animals, and she wanted to dedicate her life to giving them the same care and love Milo had received. Milo, now older and slower, continued his work at the hospital, his green eyes as bright as ever. Though his energy had waned, his spirit remained unbroken. He was still the same gentle, loving cat who had brought comfort to so many. One day, as Sarah visited the hospital during her college break, she sat beside Milo in the therapy room, stroking his fur as he rested his head on her lap. "You've done so much, Milo," she whispered, "more than anyone could ever ask for. You're a hero." Milo purred softly, his tail flicking lazily. It was as if he understood her words, as if he knew how much he meant to her, and to everyone who had ever met him. When Milo passed away peacefully in his sleep a few months later, the hospital held a memorial service in his honor. The therapy room was filled with flowers, photos, and letters from children and families who had been touched by Milo's presence. Sarah spoke at the service, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Milo taught us what it means to love unconditionally," she said. "He showed us that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. And though he's no longer with us, his legacy will live on in every life he touched." The hospital dedicated a new wing of the therapy center to Milo, complete with a mural depicting his life and work. At its center was a quote from Sarah. "Sometimes, The ones we save end up saving us. As Sarah stood before the mural, she felt a sense of peace. Milo's story had come full circle, and though she missed him dearly, she knew his spirit would always be with her, because heroes like Milo never truly leave. They live on in the hearts of those they've saved, their love and courage shining brightly for generations to come. Milo's story continued to ripple through the community long after his passing. The therapy center became a sanctuary not just for the children but for their families as well. Parents would sit in the newly dedicated Milo's Corner, a cozy section of the therapy room adorned with photos, letters, and even a small statue of Milo that one of the families had donated. Sarah often visited Milo's Corner, her heart warmed by the sight of the children playing beneath his mural. One day, as she sat on the couch with a book in her lap, a woman approached her. She looked hesitant at first, clutching a small child's hand. "Are you Sarah?" the woman asked softly. Sarah closed her book and smiled. "I am. Can I help you?" The woman nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I just wanted to thank you. My son was here last year. He didn't make it, but Milo was there for him. Your cat gave him so much joy in his last days. It meant the world to us." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She reached out, taking the woman's hand in hers. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said gently. "Milo had a way of finding people who needed him the most. I think he was meant to be with your son during that time." The woman nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "He made all the difference," she said. "And so did you." As the woman walked away, Sarah sat back, her heart heavy but full. She realized that Milo's legacy wasn't just about the children he had helped. It was about the families, the nurses, and everyone whose lives had been touched by his quiet, unwavering love. Months turned into years, and Sarah's life continued to evolve. Her time at the hospital had inspired her to pursue a career in veterinary medicine, and she threw herself into her studies with the same determination she had shown when caring for Milo. She wanted to honor his memory by helping other animals find their purpose, just as Milo had. During her final year of veterinary school, Sarah took on an internship at an animal shelter. The work was demanding, but it reminded her of why she had chosen this path. One day, as she was cleaning out a kennel, a volunteer approached her with a shy smile. "There's a new cat in the intake room," the volunteer said. "He's a bit of a handful, but I thought you might want to meet him." Sarah followed the volunteer to the intake room, where a large tabby cat paced inside a kennel. His fur was scruffy, and his green eyes were sharp and alert. Sarah's breath caught as she crouched down to get a better look. "Hi there," she said softly, reaching out a hand. The cat stopped pacing and stared at her, his tail flicking. Slowly, he stepped closer, sniffing her fingers before letting out a low, rumbling purr. "He's got a lot of personality," the volunteer said. "Reminds me of the therapy cat you told us about." Sarah smiled, her heart aching with a bittersweet nostalgia. "He does, doesn't he?" she murmured. "What's his story?" The volunteer shrugged. "He was a stray. No one knows where he came from, but he's got a lot of fight in him. I think he'd make a great companion for someone who can handle him." Sarah spent the next few weeks working with the cat, whom she named Leo. He was feisty and independent, but there was a spark in his eyes that reminded her of Milo. Slowly but surely, Leo began to trust her, and Sarah couldn't help but feel that fate had brought them together. When Sarah graduated from veterinary school, she opened her own clinic, specializing in animal rehabilitation and therapy programs. She named the clinic Milo's Haven, a tribute to the cat who had changed her life. The waiting room was filled with photos of Milo, along with letters and stories from the families he had helped. Leo became the clinic's unofficial mascot, greeting clients with his sharp green eyes and playful demeanor. Though he was different from Milo in many ways, Leo had a knack for connecting with people, and Sarah often found him curled up beside a nervous child or rubbing against the leg of an anxious pet owner. One afternoon, as Sarah was finishing up paperwork, a man walked into the clinic holding a small, trembling puppy. "I heard about this place from a friend," he said, his voice hesitant. "They said you help animals find their way." Sarah smiled, motioning for him to sit down. "We do our best," she said. "Tell me about your pup." The man explained that he had found the puppy abandoned in a parking lot, its tiny body covered in scrapes and bruises. Sarah examined the puppy carefully, her heart aching at the thought of what it had endured. But as she worked, she felt a familiar sense of purpose, the same feeling she had when she first picked up Milo from the rain-soaked bush all those years ago. "We'll take good care of him," she promised, "and we'll make sure he finds a loving home." The clinic quickly became a beacon of hope in the community, attracting not only pet owners but also volunteers and donors who believed in Sarah's mission. One day, as Sarah was sorting through a pile of mail, she came across a letter with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a little girl holding a stuffed bear, with Milo sitting proudly beside her. The note read, "Dear Sarah, thank you for sharing Milo with us. He gave us hope when we needed it most. Your kindness changed our lives, and we'll never forget it. Love, Emily." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she stared at the photo, memories of Milo flooding back. She placed the letter in a frame and hung it in the clinic's waiting room, a reminder of why she had started this journey. Over time, Milo's Haven became more than just a clinic. It became a community hub. Sarah organized workshops on animal care, hosted adoption events, and even started a therapy program for local schools and nursing homes. The program, called Paws for Love, was a huge success, with animals like Leo bringing comfort and joy to people of all ages. One day, as Sarah watched Leo interact with a group of children at a school event, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Milo's story had come full circle, his legacy living on in every life they touched. A teacher approached Sarah, her eyes shining with gratitude. "What you've created here is incredible," she said. "You've shown these kids that love and kindness can change the world." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Milo taught me that," she said, "and now it's my turn to pass it on." As Sarah stood in the doorway of the clinic one evening, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the waiting room, she felt a sense of peace. Milo's journey had started with a single act of kindness, but it had grown into something far greater, a legacy of love, resilience, and hope. And though Milo was no longer by her side, his spirit remained, guiding her every step of the way.